Hi everyone, my name is Eden Lackner, and today I'll be talking about using physical activity to combat adolescent obesity in low-income communities. So we'll first start off with adolescent obesity, the definition and prevalence. So obesity is the accumulation of adipose tissues caused by a caloric intake that is greater than what the body burns. So obesity is a significant problem in the United States, especially among youth, as childhood obesity increases the risk of obesity in adulthood along with its comorbidities. Most recent statistics state that 19.3% of children in the U.S. present with obesity. Adolescent obesity is known to have a multifactorial etiology, meaning that it can be caused by several physiological, environmental, socioeconomic, lifestyle, and genetic factors. An example of this would be having obese parents, coming from low socioeconomic status, as well as recreational accessibility barriers. So, as previously mentioned, adolescent obesity can lead to obesity in adulthood, as well as an increased risk for its comorbidities. And adolescents from low-income households are at a greater risk for obesity, as 18.9% of children from low-income households are obese, compared to 10.9% from high-income households. So, the recommended amount of physical activity for adolescents is at least 60 minutes a day, which roughly 23% of adolescents are not incorporating into their daily routines. And some behavioral risk factors that can lead to this decreased level of physical activity include sedentary lifestyles, self-esteem, and perceived health status. There are also social determinants that can affect physical activity levels, and this would include overall safety of the community, social norms surrounding physical activity, and resource limitations. So addressing obesity in adolescence is important, as adolescence is a critical time for establishing positive and protective health behaviors. What they learn during this stage in life will follow them into adulthood, and we want to give them the healthiest behaviors and habits as possible. Adolescents are the most underserved population in terms of preventative services, and this population is able to understand the consequences of unhealthy behaviors and the benefits of healthy behaviors, so they can understand the expected net gain as well as the decisional balances between what's right and what they're doing currently. Along with this, addressing obesity would build confidence and promote better physical and mental health habits. So things to remember when designing an intervention begins with remembering what the perceived barriers are that interfere with physical activity engagement, as it's important to decrease the amount of perceived barriers, as that would increase the expected net gain and what someone would want to participate in. It's important to remember that behavioral intent to work out and participate in regular physical activity does not always match the weight loss behaviors. And low-income communities, again, need adequate resources, whether this be activity equipment that is age-appropriate and not dilapidated, or education with the teachers and adults in the community that can help children understand what physical activity is. Lastly, it's important to know that there's not a significant difference in the enjoyment of physical activity among children that are obese and not obese. So that falls into attitude, and that there isn't a general negative attitude towards physical activity. So now we'll go into behavioral theories and understanding the factors contributing to physical inactivity. So first we'll start with the theory of planned behavior, which says that the intent to perform a behavior is a strong indicator for a person's actual behavior. And the constructs for this theory include attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control. So through utilizing the theory of planned behavior, it's been found that there's a gap between intention and behavior among overweight adolescents. And this can stem from lower self-control, which can lead to poor exercise habits, impatience, or even self-perception, where adolescents may be feeling too fat to exercise, or they don't have the behavioral capability to engage in regular physical activity. Next, we have the health belief model, where the expected net gain is where the perceived value of the benefits must exceed the barriers. So adolescents have a solid understanding of the perceived benefits. A study with a questionnaire gathered that adolescents understand that there's a better quality of life, better mental and physical health, and greater self-confidence associated with regular physical activity. Some examples of barriers include, among younger children, adolescents, fear of strangers, bad weather, too much homework, and being tired. And it's been noted that the barriers have the greatest impact on physical activity. It's also important to know that higher levels of social support can lead to lower levels of perceived barriers and higher levels of self-efficacy. There's also the construct of perceived seriousness, where the consequences of not being physically active were significant enough to avoid. And lastly, we have social cognitive theory, where providing children with the content and procedural knowledge of health and fitness can increase competence and promote behavior change. And one construct, perceived self-efficacy, has the greatest influence on physical activity, especially among girls from low-income communities. And this self-efficacy can be influenced by parental social support with both emotional and instrumental support. So next we'll go into the interventions and talk about what's been previously done to address physical inactivity. So the first intervention that we'll talk about is called Youth Fit for Life, which utilized a trans-theoretical model of change. So the population for this intervention were African American children ranging from the ages 8 to 12 from the southeastern U.S. coming from lower middle class households. It utilizes stages of change and self-efficacy theory in the questionnaire that it handed out both the beginning and end of the intervention, where they asked a series of questions to gauge, which stage they were at regarding physical activity, along with regarding self-efficacy, which focused on the ability to overcome social, personal, environmental barriers to exercise participation. So this intervention was 12 weeks long. It occurred at the YMCA 3 days a week and had 4 components essentially to the intervention, which were different activities each day for 20 minutes each, along with instruction and discussion, talking about self-management and regulatory skills, as well as health and nutrition education. So the results of this intervention were that a significant percentage of children advanced to a stage throughout the stages of change. For all 206 participants, the relationship between stages and changes in stages and voluntary physical activity was significant. Another significant relationship was the stage change in self-efficacy, and the changes in self-efficacy and physical activity were significant as well. So overall, we can take away from this that the use of the trans-theoretical model is valid for children and can measure progress. The next intervention that we'll talk about is the theory of planned behavior for adolescents' weight loss, which utilized the theory of planned behavior, and it focused on 86 overweight and obese adolescents ages 13 to 18, with a 3-month long So the next intervention we'll talk about is the theory of planned behavior for adolescents' weight loss, which focused on 86 overweight and obese adolescents aged 13 to 18. It involved participants and their parents attending 5 one-hour-long educational sessions from July to September 2016. Within these sessions, there were group discussions, role-playing, question and answer sessions, booklets, and movie screenings, which had a goal to increase knowledge of obesity and its signs and the risk factors, as well as symptoms and complications, trying to change the attitudes and correct misconceptions regarding obesity, the risk of obesity, and engaging in physical activity. So the children received regular engagement from the staff throughout the intervention, and questionnaires as well as body measurements were given before the start and 6 weeks after the conclusion of the intervention. So the results from this intervention showed significant increase in attitudes toward physical activity. There was an increase in knowledge as well as perceived behavioral control and intention among participants. One notable comment was that adolescents believed that they were at risk for obesity by the end of this intervention, which is important for being able to receive the benefits of the intervention. So now we'll go ahead and talk about the theories and constructs that are best adapted to addressing physical inactivity among adolescents. So first we have the trans-theoretical model of change, which is a stage theory, meaning that the behavioral change occurs as a result of individuals passing through a series of sequential stages. So there are 5 stages of change. As you can see at the bottom, we have pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And there's 10 processes of change associated with this model as well. Examples include consciousness raising, dramatic relief, self-reevaluation, and counter-conditioning. There's also 2 other constructs called decisional balance, which is similar to expected net gain, where you evaluate the pros and cons of adopting a new recommended behavior. And then we also have self-efficacy, which is a pretty common construct. With this, you would build up the child's confidence and to influence progress towards a maintenance stage. Now we have the theory of planned behavior. Raising an individual's perceived behavioral control can positively influence attitudes toward physical activity. Also, providing adequate resources in low-income communities is a facilitating factor, as this would increase the likelihood of adolescents engaging in the recommended amount of physical activity every day. We also have behavioral beliefs, where establishing these to the fact that engaging in physical activity can help combat adolescent obesity, can help understand, the importance of physical activity. Combining these constructs can influence intention towards engaging in regular physical activity among adolescents, influencing the performed behavior. Next, we have the health belief model. It's a value expectancy model where the adoption of the health protective behavior will only occur if the benefits outweigh the costs. So first we have perceived threat, where the individual must acknowledge that they are at risk for obesity and that it is imperative to correct any unhealthy behaviors. Some modifying factors for this construct include gender, social economic status, knowledge, and age. We also have expected net gain, which can influence adolescents' willingness to engage in the intervention, as well as cues to action, which will be reminders and encouragement, which would make them want to engage in physical activity. And then we have increasing self-efficacy, which can lower the perceived barriers and increase behavioral capacity. Next, we'll move into the proposed intervention strategy. So the first component of this intervention would be education and awareness. To start, we would distribute questionnaires addressing self-efficacy, response to cues to action, perceived barriers, and perceived behavioral control, as well as the stages of change. To initiate change and gain the attention of adolescents, the intervention must include an educational component where we can change the attitudes and have them believe that they are at risk for obesity or are already obese. This would entail presentations focusing on health and risk factors of obesity, what obesity looks like, some consequences, as well as bringing in testimonials of people and adolescents who went through the same thing. This would provide content knowledge, as well as content knowledge surrounding the importance of exercise. Then we would also have procedural knowledge, which would provide adolescents with a means to participate in regular physical activity. In addition to recognizing that they're at risk for obesity, we would focus on eliminating perceived barriers, For example, one of the barriers mentioned earlier was that there's too much homework, so we would teach time management skills. And another one would be lack of knowledge of how to work out. So this would be remedied by teaching basic equipment free to combat limited resources, exercise routines to build self-efficacy. And along with that, ideally, we like to raise awareness for the community, in the community, to bring adults together to raise funds for equipment and to make their community a safer place for children to play. The next component would be physical activity sessions, which would essentially feel like a summer camp. These would be hour-long sessions focusing on building self-efficacy and reinforcing cues to action. The length of this would get the participants and the children used to being active for this recommended amount of time outside of school. Ideally, this would take place from June to August, 3 days a week, during the summer session, where physical activity levels tend to drop off. The activities that would occur would be based on CDC recommendations of aerobic activity, muscle strengthening, and bone strengthening exercises. Next, we would have mentorship and family involvement. With this would be because adolescents need social support and encouragement to engage in physical activity regularly. So we would assign each participant a mentor that would keep progress of the child's improvement throughout the intervention. Ideally, this mentor would be one of the young adult leaders, as the children would see them very often, and it would be support from another peer, which can be important in improvement. Along with this, we would emphasize the impact of parental social support, that their involvement and encouragement in this intervention is critical for the success, and that support can even be them bringing them to the intervention each day, as well as emotional support regarding enthusiasm for participation in the summer program. And lastly, we'll go over an evaluation of strategies. So starting off, we're going to go over some ethical concerns and cultural values. Concerns regarding the proposed intervention include having adolescents realize that they are overweight. This could likely lead to self-esteem issues and body issues if not handled correctly. So to remedy this, we would properly train the leaders to have these conversations so that we're not demeaning any children or decreasing their self-esteem. We want to build them up and establish healthy, health-protective behaviors. Cultural values of adolescents include a desire to want to do things themselves, but also wanting support from their social circle. And this intervention would give them exactly that. You're building up their means and know-how so that they can do things themselves, but also learn this stuff with help and in the comfort of a safe place. And also they respond to positive reinforcement, which would be implemented throughout this entire intervention. So first we'll talk about potential benefits, which would be that this intervention would instill health protective behaviors as well as building confidence. The main benefit would be a decreased BMI, reducing adolescent obesity, of course. Some burdens would be the length of the intervention, as well as it being a big commitment for parents, and harm would go back to the body image issue that could come from having adolescents realize that the perceived severity and susceptibility of obesity.